What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick.
My name is Dave.
And this is the Deep Dive, and we are still in our Witness at the Cross series. We'll be in it for a couple more weeks, but it's been a great series so far.
I think so, too.
And today we're talking about the beloved disciple.
That's right.
So let's just jump in.
Just jump in.
Let's go for it. All right, Dave, I was curious if you had any issues this morning with the time change. We're recording this on Sunday. Time's just changed. We got a ghost coming in the door if you heard that, but it's okay.
Yeah, it's, I didn't really, particularly on Sundays, I get up pretty energetic. And so I had, a lot of energy coming in, and it was fine. It didn't seem that much different.
Right.
But I would tell you when I had a little pause for maybe like 10 minutes, 15 minutes after I played with the praise band this morning, and, went to the rehearsal and all of that. But before everybody came into to the service, I was sitting there for like 10 minutes, and suddenly I could feel my body sort of sinking down. So I think it's going to catch up with me this afternoon. And even after the service, I'll tell you this, I had to go take my mic off. And so I usually go back to the restroom to do that because it's under my shirt.
Right.
And so I got about halfway back there. I was going like, I don't have my keys. And so I actually turned around. I was going like, why would I need my keys to go in here? So I could tell I used all my brain cells for the sermon, and now
the rest of the day's wash.
We'll see how this podcast goes.
Okay. Yeah. I'm excited, actually.
I'm already confused because we don't have our logo up here.
Yeah, I think on Fridays they're renting out the space. So
there's another podcast
that's using the space.
We'll take that down next week. But yeah, okay.
Well, let me ask you this: while we're on the topic, are you team let's keep these time changes, or are you ready to see them go away, or do you not care?
I don't. I really, honestly, don't care. It really kind of gets on my nerves how much big deal about it happens around this time.
Right.
And I understand it, but it's been going on our entire life.
True.
And I don't remember until recent years, people just getting so fired up on social media and all this kind of conspiracy kind of nonsense that goes
People
in around.
Don't get fired up on social media, Dave.
Yeah, they do.
They're just sharing
and I
their
think that sort of feeds into it, all the Karens of the world, excuse me, Karens, but that they just get out, about stuff. It's okay. It'll take a few days to adjust, but then we will have longer, evenings.
Yeah, I'm down for
that.
More sun, later in the day.
I like the summers when it, gets dark at, 9 o'clock, a little bit after.
I would say that I'm kind of on team, let's just kind of get rid of it. But if we're going to get rid of it, I want it to stay at this one. You know what I mean? Where it doesn't get dark at 5 o'clock.
But see what happens is it's going to be 8:30 or 9 a.m., and it's not going to be light yet. And that's going to be crazy for school kids catching the bus.
Oh, yeah. I remember that at school because, it's you get out there and you're like, finally the sun's starting to come up because you kind of got through that winter.
Yeah.
Time was adding on, sun was coming up early.
But that will just prolong it when we did that. And
exactly.
It will be really dark in those winter things. So, I don't know what the solution is, and I really don't care. I'll just deal with it. Time. What is time anyway?
That's true. This got really deep and philosophical all of a sudden. What is time?
Yeah.
Well, Dave, why don't we jump into it? Why don't you kind of give us an idea of what you spoke about this morning, and we'll kind of deep dive it some.
All right. So this week we traveled over to John's Gospel for our major text. I've been bringing in other texts as I usually do, but our major text for the past few weeks has been either Matthew, Mark, or Luke. But this week we looked at John, which is very different than the other three Gospels. Although, there's some things, particularly the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus are there in those Gospels. But he tells it a little bit different, and a lot of the rest of the Gospel is very different. So I pointed out in the service, they sometimes call those other three Gospels the synoptic Gospels because they look with the same optics and things. So they kind of follow the same outline. And John, which was probably written a lot later. John was probably the last living eyewitness to all of this, and he really felt the need to write it down. And so, it's we won't unpack that now, but the audience and the reason for John writing, is different than Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and we've addressed that somewhat in some other podcasts. But so anyway, so one of the big deals as we look at John, and it is very much different, is that he has this phrase that he refers to, and that is the disciple that Jesus loved, or the beloved disciple. as it is called. And most people in most of church history has thought that that was John. And I believe it was John. You know, and I don't think that the book that we're looking at, Angela Levine, is really making a huge case. But the fact is, we don't know. This disciple is not named, and so
there's a lot of evidence to point to it, but we can't say for certain. Maybe
right, yeah. I mean, he's not named, so we don't know. There is a lot of evidence.
Yeah,
but she mentioned a couple other possibilities, and honestly, I think she was just using that as a bridge to get to where I made a point out of it, and that is that one of the suggestions is Mary Magdalene. Mm-hmm. To me, that gets to be very Da Vinci Code about that. Mary did have a very important place in the early church and with that community of disciples. And it's there probably is some patriotic stuff that goes on why we don't hear more about Mary, because she was such a significant person. But I'm sure Jesus loved her. Yeah.
Sure.
He loves everyone.
Yeah.
But I don't think she was a beloved disciple. The other person she suggested was Lazarus. And I can see that a little bit because he was one of the ones, and he was very tight with Jesus. Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, was definitely a family that he loved and spent a lot of time. And so possibly, I don't know. And really, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of defending that, that it was John, the author.
Right. But if it was John, he kind of has I could see him writing that and be like, yeah, I am the beloved disciple.
Yeah. I mean, it does that. You could take it from that way.
Yeah.
But there's another way of taking it, is that it becomes sort of a place filler symbolically for all of us, because he loves all of us. So when we see the beloved disciple, we can put ourselves, and she makes this suggestion in the book, we can put ourselves in that place. Yeah. And certainly it was a physical, real person. And maybe it was more than one person. Yeah. She was just a beloved disciple as a literary tool. But I do like it, and it worked real well in the sermon. The points I was trying to make, that we can put ourselves into the beloved disciple's place and hear the words that Jesus says from the cross. And the words that he said are pretty famously, he looks down from the cross and he sees Mary, the mother of Jesus, and a couple of other Marys, and John, and he sees, the one that he loved, the beloved disciple,
right?
And says, "Son, behold your mother; mother, behold your son." And it says from that day on, she stayed with him, she lived with him, and so from the cross, Jesus is caring about other people's, and I think there's some takeaways from that. And one, I think, is in taking care of your parents, honoring your father and mother, as the scripture says. He shows that. He demonstrates right there. Mary, there was no social safety net back then. Okay, so she was going to have somebody to take care. He was the eldest son. And so, I think one of the things that came from that book or some other book that I read, there is almost like some Jewish legal language in the way that that's stated in the Greek. And that, he is saying this is, he's putting those two together.
Like a binding
it's
element.
It's a binding two things. So where we, I think, can get application is that, you've done a lot of care for your mother lately. I know, and, I've, with my mother-in-law, we cared for my mother before she passed away too. And, that I think that does happen, but I think it's good to be reminded of it, and that there's a holiness and sacredness and command about taking care of our parents.
Yeah.
Lots of times when, as I was growing up, I heard, honor your father and mother. That means like I do whatever my mom and dad say. But I think as you get older, this sort of honoring takes on sort of a new persona and a new language for us.
Yeah.
And so I think that was important. It was a minor point, but I think an important point that Jesus is, living out the fifth commandment. I think it is there from the cross.
And I think that's such a cool thing. Even this morning, I had somebody stop me. They rolled in a little bit late to service, but they were telling me that they had just kind of reached their 1 year of being retired mark, but the first year didn't go as they had planned. They thought they'd be traveling more. but their family had a lot of
Yeah.
medical issues coming up and stuff like that. So she was able to kind of be in that space with them, more so. And I was like, well, maybe there was no better time to retire then. And she's like, yeah, if you look at it that way, so.
And I think we're going to have to, as we look particularly with the older generations that we're having, people are living longer and longer and maybe
Right.
lived out whatever retirement funds they might or might not had. But up until like very recently, I mean like 50, 75 years, it was not unusual to have a arrangement like what we have at my house with my mother-in-law living with us. That was the typical thing that was done. You
Right.
took care of your family.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's only in recent years we've had assisted livings, we've had other options available to us. But I do think, I think that responsibility that we have for one another as Christians, but particularly for our parents, is something to heed and something that we can take away from this very simple words and text that we have.
For sure.
So that was kind of my first point. The second point was that, Jesus seeing our pain. He sees us where we are, even on the cross, which is an amazing thing.
Yeah. When he's in excruciating pain,
Yeah.
he's still.
I mean, I don't think that should be lost on us.
Yeah.
Because it's just like, well, it's Jesus. He should be doing that. There's part of an attitude that we have in
Sure.
that. But he was also a human being.
Yeah.
And just had gone through just incredible physical, and was going through incredible physical pain.
Yeah.
And in the midst of that, I know myself, when I'm in pain of any kind, and it's not even anything compared to what the cross would have been. If I'm on any kind, if I got a bad toothache, I'm not noticing other people and their pain.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. You're kind of living in it as much as possible.
Right.
But actually, it's interesting. This comes up because I spoke at youth group this past Wednesday, and I was doing some research because Sarah wanted me to tackle the topic loneliness. And I was doing some research that, people who, if they find themselves in a hurt place, like being lonely and being depressed, they say one of the best things you can do to kind of to beat that type of thing is to be out and volunteer and help other people in their pain and their hurt. You know what I mean? It was like, it was interesting that they put it up. They said it was like, 60% of people who found themselves volunteering found themselves having increased, happiness and joy from doing that.
I've also seen people who have gone through great pain or gone through a difficult thing be drawn into some sort of ministry or some sort of service because of their experience, and they remembered that and they could empathize and identify. And so that would draw them in.
Yeah. I think it speaks, I'm sorry. I think it speaks to just our, like, kind of built within us that we're not supposed to just do life for just ourselves.
Right.
We're supposed to be in community. We're supposed to be kind of helping each other through good and bad times and stuff like that. I think it's just built within us.
But certainly Jesus witnesses this for us on the cross. In the great pain that he is in, he is still caring for others and taking care of his mom and the feelings of other people. I mean, last week we had the thief at the cross, and so he even through the gasp that he having as he died on the cross, he is noticing and resonating with other people.
Yeah.
And then the last point was just that, through the Spirit, and we see this witnessed here, is that God creates a new family. And it is a metaphor of the church.
Yeah.
What we see Jesus doing with John and Mary is, expanded, over and over and over and over again in the body of Christ.
Right.
And that God is just creating and building a new family between us. We are to bear one other's burdens, as Paul writes to us. But I'm reading this probably this parallel book to use also from reference. It's called Final Words. It's by Adam Hamilton. I'm looking now at the Good Friday service and trying to gather some stuff. And so I realized as I got this book that it also has a lot of stuff that worked well with this current series that we're doing. So I leaned on it a little bit this morning, and he told a couple of stories using this verse as an example. And one story I'll repeat very quickly right now. which I really liked, and it was told much better in the book than I did in the service this morning. But, he talks about the school teacher that comes out on the playground at the end of the day when most everybody else is going home, and there's this kid there by himself, and he just senses, we all in leadership with kids and stuff understand something is not right here.
Right.
And so he got involved and realized that the kid was going through a really difficult time, that he had lost his mom, and the father, who loved his son, but was having a very difficult time taking care of his son, working 2 jobs. The kid was by himself all the time. And because of this kid was by himself all the time, they were going to call social services in. Not the teacher, but, maybe the school or other neighbors or something. And so the father goes to this man, this teacher, and said, would you foster my child? I'm just at a point right now, I cannot do it. Would you foster my child? And so he took this child in and was a part of his life and raised him, helped him through high school, through college. And the kid ended up going back because of that experience that this teacher had done. He ended up going back and working in the inner city with kids that were at risk and in situations like he had been. That's awesome. And that's what his job is. That's what his vocation, ministry, or whatever. And so the button on it is Adam Hamilton's son-in-law. And so, I thought that was a pretty cool story.
That is cool.
And so I used that because I didn't want to embarrass anybody in our congregation, but I could tell, and you could tell, dozens of stories like that in our congregation.
Absolutely.
Where people have seen the church as their extended family, and people who could not drive themselves to the doctor, people who could not pay a bill, people
who had just like a medical procedure and just massive amounts of food showed up, so they didn't have to worry about it.
It just over and over and over again, and that is the body of Christ.
Yeah,
that is what we need to be living and serving in that way, and we experience it. We experience it many times. Yeah, myself.
I think it's I mean, even when I had my cellulitis back last July, a couple of people brought food over for me and Rachel. A couple people come and visit me in the hospital. You know what I mean? Like, it was cool.
But then with our situation with my mother-in-law, I mean, on Sunday morning, I mean, one of the guys in the service came to me afterwards because I said that stuff about the parenting. He said, "Man, I failed with my parents. I was not a good son. I did not take care of them." And I didn't say that to make people feel guilty, but this is a guy who, with my mother-in-law Esther, he takes her by the arm. He takes care of her when she's at church. I said, "Well, you're doing an excellent job with my mother-in-law."
Yeah.
And so but I see there, my wife often sits in the choir. And so Esther's by herself. So last week we had communion, and she's been having some mobility issues, and she's kind of stumbling. And I'm watching him, and that's just the body of Christ, So it's like I didn't have to go do it. Teresa didn't have to do it. The body of Christ responded and took care of her, and story after story of people who, that the church has driven them to the doctor when they had locked doctor's appointments, and church providing them food, churches, taking care of their kids, when they're, had an emergency or needed something. Yeah. And we were talking about Mary Ann, I'll use her name.
Sure.
Our young adults, she's like said, "Hey, we want you to come and participate in this. And so I will babysit your kids so that you can come to this."
Yep.
That's like a mother thing to do, a mother-in-law thing to do. That's
and just showed up, and found the needs, filled the needs. It's beautiful when it happens, and it's awesome to watch because it happens in so many different ways within the church. Because there's just so many different scenarios where sometimes you just need somebody to come beside you, and I love and I'm sure you'll get to it, but I love that you used the Lord of the Rings reference this week as well. You kind of kept your movie theme going, as you said. But that's, when I think of movies, that's one of the most powerful scenes to me. I was kind of rewatching it in my brain as you were saying it, because when Sam picks him up, you know what I mean, to finish, do you want to kind of preface it? Oh, they're about to throw the ring into the fire. Frodo just can't go on because of the journey they've been through. I mean, and it was a heck of a journey for those guys. You know, he got stabbed a couple times, like wars, battles, all this stuff. But they get up to the top of the mountain, and when Frodo collapses, you know, Sam's like, "What?" He said, "I can't carry the ring for you," or something like that.
Yeah, I can't carry your burden. I can't carry the ring, but I can carry you.
Yeah, and it's just so beautiful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it's interesting there. I mean, like the Lord of the Rings has more characters than the Bible. I mean, it's just so many characters. And, you know, there's different ones that shine throughout that. And Sam is sort of almost a comedic figure throughout that. You know, he does a lot of funny things, and you know, he's a simple guy, but he's loyal and he's devoted. But towards the end, he really becomes a hero.
Yeah.
And the scene just before this, also one of my favorite scenes. I don't know if you remember it, but like they're there and it just don't know if they're going to be able to get to the mountain to throw the ring and destroy the ring.
Right.
And they're laying and you know, Frodo is laying down next to this wall, and he just looks completely beat. And he says, "I can't do this anymore, Sam. I can't." And then Sam tells this thing about, you know, it's like the stories. We're in one of those stories, you know, where people, they were giving up hope, you know, that kind of stuff, but they were always hanging on to something big. You know, when things are so dark and it just looked like there was no possible way, those people were holding on to something. And Frodo says, what were they holding on? And they were holding on to the fact that there is some good in the world, and it's worth fighting for.
Yep.
And so I love that scene. And then he carries him.
Yep.
So yeah, that was my movie quote for this week.
It even reminds me, and I'm sure you know the poem, that Footprints in the Sand one. You know, where there was two paths, and then the guy's like, "Well, why did it all of a sudden go to one?" He's like, "Oh, that's when I carried you." You know what I mean? Like, it's cool to think about stuff like that.
Yeah, I love the one too where, you know, he retells the story. You know, I was there and Jesus was with him, and I looked, and you know, and then I got to this place and there were just footprints everywhere, just going in all different kinds of directions. He's going like, Jesus, you know, I understood that, like, you're walking side by side, and that point where like you carried me, I understand that. What is all of this?
Yeah.
These and Jesus says, that's when we danced.
That's cool.
That is cool.
I don't know that I've heard that one.
Yeah, I'll pull it down.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a drama that they do to a Lifehouse Everything, this song, and that's kind of the premise of the whole thing, is like they start off by dancing with God because there's no words, and you know, as the person has their journey away from God, God comes back, fights for the person, and then they dance again. So
yeah,
it's cool.
So let me, my last slide that I had up today was like, where do you find yourself in the story? Yep. You know, we're about a little over halfway through now, and we've looked at several characters. And the whole point of this is that it wasn't called Witnesses at the Cross. It's called Witness at the Cross. And that we end up like, what is going to be our witness from this? What these things, you know, either good or bad qualities, you know, bad qualities that we wouldn't do, but good qualities that, you know, we need to take from these characters. And so in saying that, I'd like to frame a question for us both to kind of discuss and talk about, was like, there is a chance, a good chance, that either people watching the service or maybe listening to this podcast are going through some stuff.
Yeah.
And going through some difficulties. And life seems really hard right now. And they may be at the point of that Frodo was, of just giving up. Let's talk about how can they reach out for help here? You know, how does someone navigate that? Because I think sometimes coming in the church and everybody's sitting around the pews, everybody's singing, and it seems good for an hour. But yet I know there's hurting people, and they just don't know how to or where to ask for those kind of connections that they need.
Well, I think you can start in a couple places, but I think the first one is just reminding people, and we talked about this on the podcast before, but we do have a group here called Stephen Ministers, who are people who have done significant training to walk with people through hard times. And it's totally anonymous. So if you're one of those people who are afraid of people finding out your stuff or whatever, it's a great tool, and they're always willing to help, and they've got males for males, females for females. You know, they have people to help, or they have ways to help make people feel comfortable.
Yeah.
I mean, I think another one is, and I think you especially are really good at kind of having an open door policy. You know, your door's always open. There's been a lot of times where somebody's walked up and said, "Hey, I need to talk to the pastor," and you'll stop what you're doing and kind of just take on that conversation wherever it goes. And
Yeah. Well, I know you're called into those kind of conversations too. And that's one thing that I would say and urge to people is that sometimes somebody will come to me and they'll say, "I know you're busy," and I know they're just trying to be respectful.
Yeah.
Maybe I sort of give off this vibe of always being busy or whatever. And if I am, I'm sorry for that. And you know, we have a lot to do.
Yeah.
For sure. But this takes priority.
Yeah.
I mean, this is kind of what the church is, what we do.
Yep.
And so, you know, don't be embarrassed. Don't feel like we're too busy or, and maybe you've had some experience of being passed around or whatever. You know, it's our intention to help people and to be the church. And so, please, you know, if you find yourself in a situation like that, do reach out to us. You know, our emails are, you know, readily available online. You can call the church, you know, and just get in touch with us.
But also a great extension of the pastoral care we do and the Stephen Ministers do is, you know, if you're not involved in a Sunday school, I would encourage trying to find a group or to help start a group, because there's something beautiful that happens when you kind of have these communities within the bigger community of the church. You know, there's been so many times, and I've heard stories even this last week of Sunday schools wrapping around people going through hard times. You know what I mean? And just those authentic relationships and trying to put yourself in a space to find some of those relationships.
Those smaller groups are the lifeline. That's how I find out about a lot of things, is through the Sunday school classes. But many times they've already taken care of it. They really are, you know, like little churches, little communities, and that is a really good next or first step is to get involved, whether it's a small group or a Bible study or particularly our Sunday school classes that meet on Sundays, or grow groups that meet on Sundays.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, the last one, and again, this is something we've said on the podcast before, but if something's going on that's so hard, don't be afraid to go find professional help.
Right.
If you're asking Nick Yother's opinion, I would never give somebody a scarlet letter for going to see the correct people to find themselves help. I would consider you brave. And I would say you're brave because you don't want to stay where you're at currently.
Yeah. And I think, just for full disclosure, both of us have been in counseling. You know, there's no it's always helped. I'm not currently. I probably need to be, but you know, for years, you know, I had a counselor and would go, you know, at least once a month to sit down and talk. And so, you know, getting into the right, you know, those right spaces with the right people. And we want to help you do that.
Yeah.
If you need help doing that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, those would be some of the ways that I would answer your question.
All right. Well, that's, and that, you know, it's sort of the end of the sermon. That was my last point, you know, to take that. But, you know, I've enjoyed this series. It really, it's been refreshing to me to prepare and to teach and preach on.
Yeah. I think the nice thing for me is, and I'm sure some other people probably feel this way, maybe they don't vocalize it, but like to think about how many times I've heard the Easter stuff, you know what I mean? And like to be able to look at a series like this and to kind of have a fresh perspective of like, oh, you know, like I haven't really sat down and thought about some of these extra people. You know, they've kind of been side characters, you know, to the story in my eyes, but to kind of give them more persona and more understanding of maybe what they were going through. I don't know. It just brings a different light.
Same here. Same for me too.
But thank you guys so much again for being here as always. You got any questions, comments, you know where you can drop them. There's chats and messages below the Facebook post and the YouTube post. We'd love to see you there. And without further ado, we hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you next time.
And God bless everybody.